But the nature of this confrontation, first, how it started, when it started, and then how it's been carried out, because there could be many ways to encircle Iran, to pressure Iran, to even hit Iran if that was the case, without, starting with the decapitation of the supreme leader.
He possibly was pressured or forced into this Iran war because this is not on his own terms.
I think we'll only know once you do kind of a post-mortem.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Alchemy of Transformation, where we go in deep into the real essence of change and transformation. And indeed, the world of politics, the world of energy, the world of Middle East is going through not one, but a series of change and transformation. And there's nobody better for us to understand it, to discern it, to uncover it, than a very creative and innovative thinker in the world of foreign policy, my dear friend Taufiq Rahim, who is a geopolitical advisor, founder of 2040 Advisory, as well as an author of a Substack, Geopolitical, and an author of a book, Trump 2.5. So with us, we have here Mr. Taufiq joining us. Welcome to the podcast, Taufiq.
Thank you, Malik. Great to be here in kind of rapid fire for this one.
Absolutely. Things change very quickly. So before things change again, let's take stock of where we are and try to understand how we got here and where we're going to go in the future. So looking back at Trump 2.5, which is your book that you did to understand how Trump's second presidency is going to be, how do you explain the Iran war as an author, as a reader of Trump, and his approach to negotiations? And what we're seeing now is a lot of dichotomy, erraticness. Is it driven by age, frustration, the stress of the job, the stress of the moment, or it's the art of the deal?
Yeah, I think, obviously I tried to put a coherence underneath the chaos. And so I do believe that there is an intentional approach. And if you go back and, read Trump 2.5 and the sections on Iran, they were prescient in the sense that they foresaw a potential confrontation, the lines that would be drawn by President Trump and the White House. And so we did see that play out last year in Operation Midnight Hammer, and then subsequently in the negotiations that were not leading to a deal. But the nature of this confrontation, first, how it started, when it started, and then how it's been carried out, I think that is where there is a lot of confusion, because there could have been many ways to encircle Iran, to pressure Iran, to even hit Iran if that was the case, without, starting with the decapitation of the supreme leader. And it leads you to believe that there was some type of pressure internally, externally, that precipitated this at this moment, because it wasn't driven by a very clear event. And then the results that have unfolded have not been as we would have seen in, let's say, Venezuela or some of the actions taken over the first year. So there is something different about this for the Trump administration, for the White House, and for President Trump himself. And I think some of the exhortations coming out reflect a frustration that he's not getting the results he wanted or desired.
And so it's very interesting. What you're referring to is that he possibly was pressured or forced into this Iran war because this is not on his own terms. Is that what you are referring to?
I think we'll only know once you do kind of a post-mortem. But there are a lot of forces always coming in. There's a packaging of intelligence that happens. And as you know, in Washington, D.C., nothing is clear cut. There's always people trying to, position something in a certain way to the president. And that is likely what happened in this case.
And certainly reflects the fact that he seems not to be in his control as he has been in case of Venezuela and other places. So moving on from Trump, somebody very intrinsically linked to Trump, something that has, become very important, particularly with respect to Iran, is the role of Pakistan. How do you explain the rise and positioning of Pakistan in the new geopolitical landscape, what's happening in the Middle East? Is this a temporary phenomenon, or it has more staying power?
It isn't incidental. It's actually very much central to the role that Pakistan may be seeking to play, but also the moment we are in geopolitically, geostrategically, and I think in terms of hard power. We're in a time where we have the reassertion of hard power and the rise of hard power. And in certain countries like Pakistan, as a result, the attempted consolidation of hard power. And that is bringing the country's bureaucracy, military apparatus, and industrial base all together in a projection of military might. And of course, the more geostrategically you're located, you're able to do that. Pakistan on the border of the Persian Gulf and Iran, but as well as China, is very much centrally located. I wrote an article just this week on the Substack called The Pakistan Gambit. And in that, I contextualize what Pakistan is doing in the rise of what I call Middle Earth, which is this vast geography that spans from the Middle East and Africa through Central Asia, partially the Caucasus, and into the subcontinent. And in this grand, vast geography, which has been consolidated in the past, as you know, civilizationally and in different empires, there are a few hard powers. Among them are, of course, Turkey, Israel. Iran has been trying to play that role, and now Pakistan is saying we are also that actor. And this is kind of where Pakistan is entering the fray. And of course, there's a lot of specifics in terms of its relationships with the actors involved, particularly Iran and America, and its leadership in the field marshal and the role he's been playing.
So we've been experimenting with this concept of hard state within Pakistan. Do you feel that the overall projection that Pakistan is giving is a reflection of what is the internal dynamics? And do you think that will continue given there is going to be commotion, disturbance in the Middle East, both regionally, locally, as well as internationally? People will be looking for hard actors to bring some order to the chaos.
Yeah, I mean, I think, as you know, external strength is a reflection of internal strength and internal coherence. Yeah. And this is the biggest challenge, in front of Pakistan and really its leadership of hard power, which is the military apparatus. They've done something very, I think successful in the last year and a half. And if we had sat down a year and a half ago, which we did maybe a year ago, but before the Trump administration, we looked at Pakistan, we would have said they probably have to release Imran Khan from jail. They're in a very difficult situation. There really needs to be a rethink. And as we fast forward to today, from that time, I don't think it's clear that they need to release Imran Khan from jail. And in many ways, they've really positioned themselves well hitherto. And the partnership between the civilian and military branches has been very cleverly executed, obviously behind the scenes with different challenges and differences. And we know that. But given the history over the last 80 years, I think this is pretty impressive in how they've been able to be in lockstep. That being said, it remains to be seen over the next 2 to 5 years, what is the economics of Pakistan, which are then obviously affected by this crisis. And then what further entanglements could they be involved in, given that they've created these alliances with Saudi Arabia, etc. So there are headwinds on the horizon. And I think this is very much an evolutionary project. And this is how the leadership will be evaluated. Can they evolve Pakistan? Can they evolve the nature of how they rule? And can they foster a new coherence? Not based on the founding of Pakistan from 80 years ago, but on something new and different for the world we're in today.
Very interesting times. And so, when you look historically at the region, there are civilizational powers like Turkey, like Iran, Pakistan, Egypt, perhaps Saudi Arabia to a lesser extent, that have shaped the wider Middle East. If the future resembles the past, if you think about it, what is the space for smaller countries like Kuwait, Oman, Bahrain, Qatar, and UAE, which really came out after World War I, the Treaty of Lausanne and others, they've come out of them, and they don't have a longer history. So what do you see the role of these smaller nations?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the civilizational depth, the ability to understand what is a coherent state from a cultural and socio-cultural, perspective. That's going to be very important. I think some of these smaller states are able to achieve that, so they can have this type of internal resonance. Maybe it's tribal, maybe it's cultural, and so they have a background. Some are more artificially generated, and they're going to have a very tough time because you're both small and you don't really have a clear kind of raison d'etre. And that in, the competitive landscape that we're headed into geopolitically, it's not very survivable. But if we look at the past, and I think you're right, I think we're heading into kind of a past and future convergence, and we're going to have things that seem like they've never happened before, including in statecraft. And then, of course, we'll have empires alongside city-states, alongside countries, etc. And this will unfold for the next 10, 15 years. But some of these smaller countries can still play a role. They can play a role as city-states. They can play a role as, small states that are, let's say, safe havens of some kind. But they have to understand their role vis-a-vis other great powers, other civilizational forces, and accept that role. The challenge will be when smaller states try to punch above their weight. I think that could have existed under the American umbrella that we've had in the Cold War that we had. It is not survivable going forward. So you have to know what is your value proposition to powers, and it cannot be that we're going to confront those powers.
For a long time, these countries came under the Ottomans, then they came under the protection of the British, and later on the Americans. And if that kind of arrangement changes, so you have to really revisit your business model and know what kind of position your country occupies. So coming back to that point and thinking of it from the US perspective, US is a permanent feature, a big player in the region. Will the US keep its military footprint in the Middle East? Will it expand it or gradually reduce it as the region becomes more unstable and expensive to manage? And what then is the role of smaller powers like Pakistan in the vacuum that is created as a result of any US withdrawal from the region?
Well, I think this is like the important point because, ultimately there's a lot of discussion around the outcome. And I think actually in this case, it's the process that's important, at least from Pakistan's perspective. And within Pakistan itself, amongst the political commentariat and others, I think they need to let go of the outcome, which is outside of Pakistan's control. There are greater forces, challenges. You cannot guarantee everything that's going to unfold in the negotiations. But the insertion of Pakistan geopolitically, the elevation of its relationship with other hard powers across this vast geography creates a new potential fabric, that links hard power from Turkey into Pakistan, potentially engaging Saudi Arabia as an emerging entrant into that space, or at least a supportive one. And in that sense, this organization or alliance or whatever we want to call it, framework, can be put at the service of the American empire project as it recedes or changes shape. Now, people might say, well, I don't want to be in the service of the American empire. Well, what that means is really that you're not confronting it, you're guaranteeing certain type of security provisions, trade flows, etc. But actually in the new geopolitical landscape, you can actually maintain a lot of your autonomy. And so by being almost a partner in service of America, this becomes a way to achieving greater sovereignty over time. And so this is, I think, where we're going to see a little bit around Pakistan. And then we'll see kind of, how this unfolds.
So I think that's very interesting to follow. But of course, the region is in the shadows of two other powers. One is China. So I'll first ask you about China. In the background of all of this is China. Is there a bigger narrative unfolding in the background with respect to China and China's move and China's role in the region?
Well, this is, I think, another, interesting thing for, I think, Iran and Pakistan most acutely because they are very geographically close to China. They have a lot of links in many different ways. Of course, in Pakistan, you've had so much of the investment around the corridor that's happened, right? The CPEC. So it's not something where you can just let go. But I go back to 1971. and Henry Kissinger. And when he wanted to make an entreaty to China, the path to China was through Pakistan and facilitated by Yahya Khan, the president at the time, General Yahya Khan. And I don't think those are contradictory aspects for America or for Pakistan. However, China today is not the China of yesterday. It is seeking to have a very formidable and strong role. So what becomes important in this equation is that China and the United States also have a dialogue, also understand where they're demarcating their balance of power. And this is, I think, what we're headed towards. And we have the first meeting in this term between President Trump and Xi Jinping coming up. Hopefully it's not postponed. You never know. And I don't think it's going to be the last. And this is really what the world will be watching, what Pakistan will be watching, is can they create a frame for a new balance of power? And within that, other countries can then be positioned and understand how to engage.
You use my favorite term from Metternich, balance of power. The Middle East has always had a balance of power, whether it was an Ottoman, Turkic, Seljuk Empire, or the Safavid or the Iranian empire. There's always been, and there needs to be some kind of balance. And then that has to be in the context of the bigger balance between USA and China in the region. And so I think no podcast with a Pakistani can be complete without mentioning India and the role of India in all of this. Of course, Dubai, hugely Indian influenced, a lot of Indian expatriates. So, and India has strong business and defense relationship with the Middle East. But somehow it's been pushed to the sidelines. You remember famous quote that Pakistan is a broker in a kind of a way. Dalali was the word used by Jaishankar. So what is the role of India in all of this in emerging Middle East? Can India make peace with Pakistan? Does it have to? And vis-a-vis China, what is the future of India?
Well, it's a big challenge because obviously there was a decade-long effort to link this new corridor, this new kind of framework that would go from India all the way to Israel, right? And it got supercharged during the Biden administration. It's continued in the Trump administration. Pax Silica is partially related to that. And then, of course, this war, raises those questions of new energy pipelines and corridors and so forth. But I think Pakistan's, emergence, obviously it's been there. It's not new, but its emergence with strength, I think, causes people to wonder, why would you give up Pakistan to other powers? Why would you not bring that into the fold? And so I think the American, shift and its own metamorphosis as an imperial power doesn't mean that it is going to disappear. It just means that it's going to have to learn how to manage power differently. And so there will still be an American security architecture. And the question is going to be, really, it's around, I think, these three countries, Israel, Iran, and India, and how do they integrate with other powers? And for this group, who are actually all linked civilizationally over time and through faith and other ways, I think there needs to be a meeting of the minds. And in particular for India and Pakistan, I think everybody on the subcontinent now knows in this changing landscape, enmity between these two countries is really a waste of time. Nobody has the time for this at this moment. And the faster we can get past this, it's going to be better for everybody in the world. And it's actually what needs to happen. And so I think it hopefully is a matter of time.
So thank you for all of this discussion. And before you go, tell me your one bold, can be more than one bold positive prediction about the Middle East and one bold negative or pessimistic prediction about the region or the current scenario.
I think we are moving towards a place where actually America is less involved and intervening in the region for the first time in maybe half a century. So while it looks like the opposite is the case, I think that's the prediction that I have. The negative side is that power doesn't settle on its own. It settles when it confronts other power. That is the striking balance. When you have polarization and you have similar weights of power, they're going to have their dynamics. And so when they figure out where they sit with one another, that's when the region itself will be stable, the wider region. So I don't think we are out of the turmoil anytime soon.
And I think that's very interesting because the Safavids and the Ottomans, although they were rivals, but they provided some kind of stability on the borders. There was always some skirmish and the borders would be readjusted, but the wider area was generally peaceful and stable. So only through confrontation and finding out each other's boundaries of pain and tolerance, which I'm sure is being worked out now, can these matters eventually settle. Any parting thoughts before you go?
No, I think we covered a lot of the points. The one thing I would say is that all of this I think relates to something I see under the surface, which is there's a growing industrial base in this part of the world called Middle Earth, and it's something I didn't see 5-6 years ago. And we're going to see something very interesting. And if that industrial base grows, it might mean that we have a new entrant in the world. Before we talked about manufacturing from the United States, then we talked about it from East Asia and then predominantly China. And of course, we've had high-level advanced manufacturing from Europe. But we have something else unfolding now in some of these disparate countries in this geography. That's something to keep an eye on.
Excellent. And thank you very much for that, Taufiq. It was a very enlightening and understanding of what's happening and bold predictions for the future. Do subscribe to the Alchemy of Transformation on YouTube channel and the website. And subscribe to your geopolitical Substack. If you can give the address for that, Taufiq.
Geopolitical with an O.com.
That's easy to remember. Do subscribe if you want to hear more about Taufiq's thoughts on this very important and defining moment of our history. Thank you very much for joining us.